Although 19th century reformers and commentators tended to lump the labouring classes, as they called them, together as one mass, in fact their lives were a kaleidoscope of contrasting and ever-changing experiences. The lives of these people made up some of that kaleidoscopic picture. Alexander Somerville, born 1811. A London needlewoman, birth date unknown. Thomas Wood, born 1822. Henry Broadhurst, born 1840. Lucy Luck, born 1848. Ben Tillett, born 1860. Hannah Mitchell, born 1871. All these people described their lives in their own words. The words were recorded, some by themselves in autobiographical writing, some by the journalists and social investigators who surveyed the labouring classes in the 19th century. Their words give a unique insight into 19th century working lives. Alexander Somerville began his working life in the 1820s as a farm labourer.
During the summer months of 1821, I was chiefly employed in hoeing turnips. At harvest, I was a binder and shearer. When the harvest was over, I got a quantity of draining to do. In the winter, and during 2 months in the following spring, I engaged to break the stones on a public road. Work was exceedingly scarce that winter, and seeing no chance of getting employment elsewhere, I contracted to break the stones at the price offered to me. In 1825, everybody from the country was going to Edinburgh to get work. In 1826, everybody was coming back again. Labourers returned to the country as well as skilled artisans. 15 months earlier, I'd been made a ploughman because men were so scarce. But it was difficult to get work of any kind now.
Alexander Somerville's words reveal some of the characteristics of labouring work.
I was a binder and shearer. I engaged to break the stones on a public road.
He changed employers and jobs frequently. All labourers did this, getting work where and when they could, sometimes for just a few days or even hours.
15 months earlier, I'd been made a ploughman, but it was difficult to get work of any kind now.
Sometimes he worked, sometimes he had no work. For casual labourers, work was irregular and unpredictable. Factory work was more regular. It provided a steadier wage, though not necessarily higher. Lucy Luck started work in 1857 in a mill.
I was not quite 9 years old when I was sent to Tring with another girl to work in the silk mills. The first day I was frightened at the noise of the work and the wheels flying round. I was too little to reach my work, and so I had to have what was called a wooden horse to stand on. I wasn't yet 11 when I had to work all day at the mill. 6 o'clock in the morning until 6 at night. My money was only 2 shillings 6 a week up to the time I left.
Lucy Luck left the mill at the age of 15 for a job as a straw plat weaver. Thomas Wood started work in a mill in Bingley, Yorkshire in 1830, nearly 30 years before Lucy.
My school life came to an end when I was nearly 8 years old. I went to work at John Sharp's mill at Bottom Town. My usual hours of work were from 6 in the morning till 7:30 at night. Breakfast and tea had to be taken at work and in snatches. When it suited the master, he'd run the mill till 9 o'clock. Mothers used to, on these occasions, come to meet the children, to take them home, for fear of them falling to sleep on the way. For these long hours, after about 2 or 3 weeks for nothing, I received 1 shilling 6 pence per week. Small as it was a sensible and much-needed acquisition to the family store.
Thomas Wood left the mill at 15 to train as a mechanic. These accounts are separated by 30 years, so it's interesting to compare them.
The usual hours of work were from 6 in the morning till 7:30 at night. But when it suited the master, he'd run the mill till 9 o'clock.
I had to work 6 o'clock in the morning until 6 at night.
The working day for children like Lucy was shorter. Between 1833 and 1850, there were 4 Factory Acts in which laws were introduced to control hours of work. They applied to just one industry, the textile industry. Why did the first Factory Acts apply only to the textile industry? In 1833 in Lancashire, something like 50% of workers in the cotton industry were under the age of 13. Early in the century, the question of child labour in the new mills and factories was already being widely discussed. In 1818, Robert Owen, owner of Lanark Mills, called the system of employing children in manufactures
worse than any slavery.
Reformers constantly refer to factory children as slaves. This illustration comes from a novel. This cartoon was published in 1835. Richard Ostler, a reformer who had been involved in the fight against black slavery, wrote in 1833,
"It is notorious that the health of the Negro slave, the adult felon, the horse, the cabbage, the strawberry is protected by the law, but the children of the poor are unprotected."
Ostler, with Michael Sadler and John Fielden, both mill owners, was the driving force behind the 1833 Factory Act. This established the principle that the state should intervene to protect children as they could not protect themselves. Gradually, this protection was extended beyond children to women. Restricting the hours of both women and children in the textile industry tended to limit the hours men worked, but the Factory Acts themselves did not control the hours of men. The mid-19th century Factory Acts improved conditions for a relatively small number of workers. Others improved their conditions by their own efforts, uniting to form trade unions. In the mid-19th century, Henry Broadhurst worked at the craft of stonemason. He was a member of the Stonemasons Society, the stonemasons' trade union.
I devoted my energies to committee work in the Stonemasons Society. I proposed the establishment of a fund by which a small pension was to be granted to men who had been members of the union and were unable any longer to pursue the trade of mason. I then turned my attention to the question of allowances to the unemployed. I advocated a system of small weekly allowances to men out of employment. In the spring of 1872, the men engaged in the building trades agitated for a reduction in the working hours and an increase of 1 penny per hour in their wages. A conference was agreed upon, consisting of a committee of the Mason Society and an equal number of representatives of the Master Builders Association. After 2 meetings, the conference drew up the conditions for the resumption of work: an immediate advance of a halfpenny per hour and a reduction in the hours of work from 56.5 to 52.5 per week for 9 months in the year and to 47 in the remaining 3 months.
Henry Broadhurst gives a good picture of the role trade unions played in people's working lives.
A small pension was to be granted, and a system of small weekly allowances.
Members paid subscriptions, money, into a fund. In return, that fund would pay them money when they had no work or could not work.
The men agitated for a reduction in the working hours.
The members of a trade union could act together to improve their working conditions and their wages. If the employer refused them, they could withdraw their labour and strike, as the stonemasons did successfully in 1872. But not all strikes were successful. In 1853, the cotton spinners of Preston returned to work after 40 weeks with no increase in their wages. Acts of Parliament and trade union activity improved conditions for certain groups of workers, but not for everyone. In the late 1840s, Henry Mayhew interviewed casual workers in London. The interviews were published in the Morning Chronicle newspaper. These are the words of a needlewoman.
Shirt work is the worst work, the very worst that can be got. Oh, cannot make more of these at 6 shillings a dozen than 1 a day, yielding 3 shillings a week. Oh, the trimmers would be about 3pence. 6pence for a candle, making 9pence to be deducted. So leaving 2 shillings and 3pence a week clear. I mean, I've known the prices much better when I first began to work at the business. The shirts they now give 6pence for was then a shilling. Those now at 2pence, 8pence. I cannot say what the cause may be. I think there are so many to work at it that one will underwork the other. The sweaters screw down the people as low as they possibly can. Prices are not enough for food and clothing. The work people are very dissatisfied and very poor. Yeah. Very poor.
Why did many workers remain outside the law and outside trade unions? The extension of the laws controlling factory conditions beyond the textile industry was a slow process. A series of Acts of Parliament in the 1860s and one in 1878 gradually brought the workshops and small industrial premises within the law. Casual workers in the sweater trades, as they were called, were not affected by these laws. Clothing was one of these trades. The 1864 Royal Commission on Children's Employment described how this trade operated.
The material is cut out and made up into bundles. This the outworker takes away and brings back completely sewn. Some of these outworkers employ only their own family, others 100 or more.
This system of working was not controlled by Factory Acts, and thousands of workers made clothes, boxes, metal goods and hats. These casual workers were not members of any trade union. Trade unions in the mid-19th century were either societies of skilled craftsmen, like shipwrights or engineers, or they were based in a few big industries like mining and textiles, where they represented the interests of the semi-skilled workers. For the most part, these unions had no interest in the welfare of the unskilled. Thomas Wright, a journeyman engineer, wrote in 1873 that skilled artisans thought labourers were
an inferior class and should be kept in their place.
The main concern of the skilled unions was to stop the wage rate of their members falling. This made women unwelcome. Emma Patterson, founder of the Women's Trade Union League, wrote in 1874, "The fear that women will lower wages has led many trade societies to pass rules forbidding their members to work with women." Women and the unskilled were rarely members of a trade union. But in the last quarter of the 19th century, a change began.